Hey everyone, and welcome to this comprehensive chat about how to keep yourself warm, comfortable, and level-headed when you decide to bug in during a severe winter storm. I want you to imagine what it might feel like to suddenly lose heat in your home just as the outside temperature nosedives into dangerously low territory. Maybe the wind is howling around the corners of the house, rattling windows and doors, and there's no quick trip to the store for extra supplies because the roads are clogged with snow and ice. In that moment, your house can transform from a place of safety to a frigid bunker if you haven't planned ahead. And it's not just about comfort. When it's cold enough, pipes can freeze, health can deteriorate, and morale can slip through the cracks before you even realize it. It's easy to assume the power grid will always be there for us, but every so often, Mother Nature reminds us that our high-tech conveniences have limits. A massive blizzard or ice storm can snap power lines or knock out entire substations, leaving entire regions in the dark and cold. If you're listening to this, you're probably keenly aware that it's better to be prepared than to be caught off guard when the lights go out. Today, we're going to walk through some detailed, practical strategies for insulating your home, generating heat safely, keeping your morale intact, and making sure you have enough resources to ride out a bitter winter scenario for days or even weeks. But before we dive deep, let me just ask you one favor. If you find this guide useful, I'd love it if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. Doing that helps me keep making these in-depth discussions. So by supporting the channel, you're also fueling future content that might help you or someone else in the next big crisis. Also, check out the tagged products in this video if you want some solid recommendations for gear and supplies. All right, with that out of the way, let's get into the heart of the matter and talk about where those winter hazards really begin, with your home's own vulnerabilities. One of the biggest pitfalls people face during a winter emergency is not having a clear idea of just how quickly a house can lose heat. If you're in a newer home with excellent insulation, you might stay cozy for a while. But if you're in an older place, or you simply haven't checked the seals around doors and windows, you could be in for a rude awakening the moment the power goes out. Drafts and air leaks can let that precious warmth slip away faster than you'd expect, leaving you bundling up in layers. Take a quick mental tour of your home. How many windows do you have? Are they single pane or double pane? Even newer double pane windows can have weak points along the frames, and older single pane windows might leak air like crazy. The same goes for doors, especially if they're not outfitted with weather stripping or proper sealing. Then there's the attic, a spot people often ignore because it's out of sight. But if your attic is poorly insulated or the insulation's damp, that heat will escape right through the roof. Don't skip the basement or crawl space. If cold air is rushing in from below, it doesn't matter how tightly sealed your windows are upstairs. That frigid air can seep up through the floorboards, chilling your living space. Pipes in uninsulated basements are especially prone to freezing, which can turn into a real emergency if a burst pipe leads to flooding. Nobody wants to deal with that in sub-zero temperatures. So how do you figure out the gaps in your home's defenses? A simple approach is using a lit candle or even just your hand to feel for cold drafts around window frames, door edges, electrical outlets, and where pipes or cables run through the walls. If you sense a draft or see the candle flame flicker, that's a clear indicator you need better sealing. It might take some detective work, but it's worth every minute. Once you identify your home's unique set of vulnerabilities, you can start tackling them before the weather gets nasty. Whether that means adding foam insulation in the basement, installing better door sweeps, or updating the attic insulation, these fixes go a long way toward improving your odds in a winter crisis. Let's move on to how to actually create a more robust insulation strategy for your living space. Insulation is the bread and butter of winter survival inside your house. Even if you have a top-of-the-line wood stove or a fantastic propane heater, it won't matter much if all that heat is leaking away as fast as you can generate it. So let's think about some of the practical steps for locking in the warmth. First off, the basics. Weather stripping around your doors, caulk for window frames, and door sweeps along the bottom edge to block out any gap near the threshold. These items are easy to install and relatively cheap, yet they can dramatically reduce drafts. If you have older windows that aren't well sealed, you can cover them with plastic insulating film or even bubble wrap, especially for windows you don't need to look out of all the time. Bubble wrap might look a little odd, but it's surprisingly effective for trapping air and slowing down heat transfer. Another trick is focusing on your floors. Whether you have hardwood, tile, or even thin carpeting, you might notice that the ground can get quite chilly, and that cold radiates upward. Throwing down area rugs or even layering cardboard underneath can keep your feet warmer and reduce heat loss. It's a quick fix that can make a big difference in how comfortable you feel. Don't overlook the idea of a warm zone. In a crisis, you might not want to heat your entire house, especially if you have limited fuel or a smaller scale heat source. So pick 1 or 2 rooms that can become your main living and sleeping quarters. Ideally, these are interior spaces, or at least areas without a lot of windows. Hang heavy blankets or tarps over doorways to keep warmth contained. This approach is basically about shrinking your heated area, which makes it much easier to maintain a livable temperature. You can even toss some rugs on the walls if you have to, adding an extra layer of insulation. Yeah, it might look a little silly, but your goal is staying warm, not winning interior design contests. Alright, so once you've locked down the insulation basics, let's chat about those often overlooked ways to generate or retain heat. We all know about fireplaces, space heaters, and layering up with sweaters, but there are some less obvious tricks that can go a long way in a pinch. One interesting method involves thermal mass. If you have bricks, large stones, or even big jugs of water, you can heat them near a stable heat source, like a fireplace or even in direct sunlight, and then move them into your living area to slowly radiate warmth. It might seem old-fashioned, but it can raise the temperature in a small zone enough to be noticeable. Another method that gets a little more attention these days is passive solar heating. Even in winter, the sun can provide a decent amount of warmth if you have south-facing windows. Keep those curtains or blinds open when the sun's out. Let the natural light heat up the room, and then close them once the sun goes down to trap that heat. It's simple, free, and doesn't rely on fuel or electricity. You won't be able to heat your whole house this way in a blizzard, but every bit helps. There's also the often mentioned candle heater, placing tea light candles under a clay pot with a hole on top, which gets warm and radiates heat slowly. It's not going to replace a full-sized heater, but in a small room or a makeshift tent setup, that extra bit of warmth might be enough to keep you comfortable while you read or rest. Just don't forget to maintain proper fire safety measures. Speaking of tents, if you're really strapped, set up an insulated tent right inside your living room. Your own body heat can warm that small area considerably, reducing the need to keep a large space toasty. And remember, cooking, if done wisely, can also contribute to heating your space. Just be sure you're ventilating appropriately. Cooking generates steam and heat, so in a power-down scenario, a small propane or butane stove can both feed you and add a few degrees of warmth. Though again, keep an eye on carbon monoxide and always follow the manufacturer's safety guidelines. Next up, we'll dive into the more robust heat sources and how to use them safely. Let's talk about the big guns, so to speak. Wood stoves, fireplaces, portable propane heaters, kerosene heaters, and electric space heaters powered by generators. Each has its own advantages and drawbacks, and each demands a unique approach when it comes to safe operation. Wood stoves and fireplaces are among the most classic methods for keeping a home warm without electricity. If they're properly installed and the chimneys maintained, they can be lifesavers when the grid goes down. The main challenge is making sure you have enough seasoned firewood. Wet or unseasoned wood can lead to creosote buildup, which increases the risk of chimney fires. Also keep in mind that a fireplace can be less efficient if it's just a traditional open design. A wood stove with a closed firebox is often much more effective at delivering sustained warmth. Portable propane or kerosene heaters can pump out a lot of heat, but they must be used with caution. Ideally, you'd pick models rated as safe for indoor use, with features like oxygen depletion sensors and tip-over shutoff. Even then, you need ventilation. Cracking a window might seem counterintuitive when you're trying to stay warm, but that small exchange of air helps prevent carbon monoxide buildup. A carbon monoxide detector is a non-negotiable if you plan on using any combustion-based heater. Electric space heaters can be fine if you have a robust power source like a generator or a large solar battery bank. But keep in mind, space heaters can draw a fair bit of wattage. You might be better off using a lower power electric blanket or heating pad to create localized warmth, rather than attempting to heat an entire room using battery power. No matter what heating method you employ, one tip is to place a reflective surface, such as a Mylar emergency blanket, or even something like a car sunshade, behind the heater. This directs more heat into the room rather than letting it get absorbed by the wall. These little efficiencies can add up, especially when you're dealing with limited fuel or power. Now that you've got some solid heating solutions in mind, let's shift gears toward the crucial topic of health and safety during a big freeze. When the temperature dips inside your home, your body has to work harder to maintain its own warmth, which can lead to fatigue, stress, and an increased risk of hypothermia. Dressing in layers is probably the oldest and simplest approach to staying warm. Start with a moisture-wicking base layer so sweat doesn't stay on your skin. Add an insulating layer, like fleece, wool, or down, and top it off with something that blocks wind or drafts. Don't forget hats, gloves, and extra socks. Keeping your head, hands, and feet warm can make a huge difference in your overall comfort. If you're going to sleep in a cold environment, it's often wise to gather everyone into a single space. Humans generate body heat, so huddling together under thick blankets or 0-degree rated sleeping bags conserves energy. Check on each other's well-being too. Sometimes folks with lower body fat or underlying health conditions can slip into hypothermia quickly. Look out for signs like uncontrollable shivering, slurred speech, or unusual confusion. If that happens, you'll need to gently warm that person with blankets, warm water bottles, not boiling, or even skin-to-skin contact if necessary. Carbon monoxide poisoning is a silent, deadly threat whenever you're burning fuel indoors. If you're using any sort of combustion heater, wood, propane, kerosene, install battery-powered CO detectors. Test them regularly and always keep a window slightly open for ventilation. A similar logic applies to smoke detectors. The air might be colder, but that doesn't mean a stray spark can't cause a fire, especially if your living space is cluttered with blankets, cardboard, or other makeshift insulation. Keep a fire extinguisher within reach of your primary heat source. Another subtle issue is humidity. Winter air can be brutally dry, and heating methods often dry it out even more. You might want to hang a damp towel or two near, but not too close to, a heat source to add a bit of moisture into the air. This helps with breathing and comfort, though you don't want so much humidity that it causes condensation and mold problems. It's a balancing act, like most things in winter survival. Let's move on to food and water considerations, which play a crucial role in keeping your core temperature up. Staying warm isn't just about insulation and heaters. Your body also needs fuel. The more well-fed you are, the easier it is for your internal furnace to keep you cozy. High-calorie, nutrient-rich foods are worth their weight in gold during a winter emergency. Canned stews and soups are excellent because they're comforting, energy-dense, and can be heated quickly on a small stove. Peanut butter, nuts, dried fruits, and whole grains are also great for snacking throughout the day. You may lose power for your refrigerator or freezer, so plan to eat perishable items first. If you have meat or other frozen goods, cook them early, if it's safe to do so, and store leftovers in a cooler if the outside temperatures are cold enough to act like nature's refrigerator. But remember that daytime sunshine can still cause thawing if it's bright enough, so you'll need to monitor any outdoor stored food. Water is just as important. If you rely on a well with an electric pump, you might lose water entirely unless you have a manual backup or a generator. Even if you're on city water, pipes can freeze or municipal systems can fail under extreme conditions. Stash at least 2 weeks' worth of water for every member of your household, including pets. Keep those containers off the floor if possible, where it's coldest. If push comes to shove, you can melt snow, but you must purify or boil it before drinking. You can also gather rainwater or melt ice, though again, purification is key. Don't overlook the psychological advantage of hot drinks. A cup of tea, coffee, or hot cocoa not only provides a quick warmth boost, but also lifts morale. Boiling water for tea also doubles as a disinfection process if you're using questionable water sources. And if you're using something like a camping stove or portable propane burner, the heat generated during cooking can slightly raise your living area's temperature. That brings us to the next big piece of the puzzle: staying positive and clear-headed in a cold, possibly cramped environment. A harsh winter storm can stretch on for days, and cabin fever is no joke. When you're stuck indoors with few entertainment options, tensions can rise, and it's easy to get on each other's nerves. That's why having a plan for mental wellness is nearly as vital as your plan for physical warmth. Even something as simple as letting in sunlight during the day can help regulate mood. So, open those curtains or windows when it's safe and bright out. Create a daily schedule. Yes, it might sound rigid, but having an agreed-upon routine can give everyone a sense of purpose. Maybe you take turns cooking and cleaning up, or you rotate the job of checking for drafts, adjusting blankets, or feeding the wood stove. A sense of teamwork goes a long way towards staving off boredom and resentments. Entertainment helps too. Board games, card games, and puzzles can keep your brain engaged. If you have a charged laptop or a tablet and can occasionally power it, you could watch downloaded shows or movies for a morale boost. If you have children, try to maintain some sense of normalcy for them by setting aside playtime or educational activities. Make sure they're bundled up if it's cold, because kids might not always notice when they're getting chilled. Physical activity also plays a huge role. It might seem counterintuitive to exercise when you're cold, but light workouts, stretching, or even dancing around can help warm you up from the inside. This is also good for burning off any tension or restlessness that comes from being cooped up. Fresh air is beneficial too, so if conditions permit, take quick, safe breaks outside to clear your head. But obviously, if the wind chill is dangerously low, exercise caution. The main goal is to maintain some semblance of normal life patterns, so you're not just huddling in survival mode, feeling miserable. Now, let's discuss how to plan for different durations of potential crises. For a short-term issue, say a power outage lasting a day or two, you might get by with minimal effort. Simply layering up, sealing obvious drafts, and maybe lighting a few candles could suffice until the grid comes back online. Your fridge and freezer, if left closed, can often keep food safe for at least 24 hours. A small stash of water might be enough, and you can keep spirits high knowing it's just a temporary inconvenience. But let's face it, many winter storms can cause outages of a week or more. That's the medium-term scenario. Now you're leaning heavily on your backup heat sources, rationing your fuel, and carefully planning meals so you don't waste resources. You'll probably restrict yourself to a warm zone instead of trying to heat the entire house. You'll also be more vigilant about everyone's emotional well-being. It's at this stage that you might realize you're running low on certain supplies. A stark reminder of why stockpiling ahead of time is so crucial. Then there's the long haul, which could stretch beyond 2 weeks, possibly up to a month or more. In this extreme case, you're in a whole different ballgame. You might exhaust your short-term supplies and have to rely on real community cooperation. Neighbors who have a chainsaw, a generator, or access to more wood might pool resources with those who have extra food. Security can become a concern too, because if the crisis drags on, people can grow desperate. In these scenarios, you might need robust plans for everything from refilling medication to safely storing larger quantities of fuel. Having multiple layers of redundancy in your heating and power systems is invaluable when you start crossing the threshold from a mild inconvenience into a full-blown crisis. Finally, let's talk about how you can set yourself up for long-term resilience and cover all your bases. One of the best things you can do is invest in multiple methods of heating and cooking. Maybe you have a wood stove as your primary off-grid heater, but you also keep a small propane heater as a backup. On top of that, you have an electric space heater you can run off a generator for short stints if it gets brutally cold. This multifaceted approach gives you options if one system fails or you run out of a particular fuel. Of course, each method must be matched with adequate safety measures: fire extinguishers, Colorado detectors, and the right ventilation. Fuel storage is another essential aspect. If you're using propane, keep multiple cylinders outside in a secured area. If wood is your main source, you'll want a big stack of properly dried logs kept in a place where they won't get buried in snow or soaked by rain. Kerosene users should label their containers clearly and store them in a cool, well-ventilated spot. Gasoline for generators should be treated with stabilizers and rotated to keep it fresh. The last thing you want in a deep freeze is to discover your stored fuel isn't usable. Don't overlook the structural elements either. Adding more insulation to your walls and attic can be a major project, but it pays off whenever the temperature plunges. Sealing any basement cracks, upgrading to double or triple pane windows, or even adding storm shutters can significantly raise the baseline comfort level and cut down on heat loss. If you're a homeowner with the resources, these investments can do wonders for both everyday heating bills and emergency readiness. Testing your setup is crucial. Think about doing a weekend test in the winter where you shut off your main breakers to simulate a power outage. See how fast your home cools down and how quickly your chosen backup heaters or stoves can bring it to a comfortable level. Check if you actually have enough water stored and note if any unexpected weak points crop up. This rehearsal might reveal that your generator needs maintenance or that you're blowing through propane faster than anticipated. It's better to learn that now than during a life-threatening event when supplies may not be easily restocked. We've covered an enormous amount of ground here, from the critical step of evaluating where your home might be hemorrhaging heat, to the nitty-gritty details of choosing safe heating methods and ensuring you have enough to eat and drink when a blizzard or ice storm renders modern conveniences useless. We've talked about layering clothes, grouping together in a warm zone, using creative solutions like heating stones or bubble wrapping windows, and balancing the need for ventilation with the danger of carbon monoxide. We've also explored the psychological side, how to keep your spirits up and handle the stress of being cooped up in a cold environment for days or weeks on end, which is not something many of us are used to in our everyday lives. If all this resonates with you, and you feel like you've picked up some valuable insights, please do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe before you head out. Those simple gestures make a huge difference, helping the channel grow so I can keep bringing you more content on practical, life-saving topics. And I also encourage you to check out the tagged products in this video. They're selections that I genuinely believe can help folks shore up their winter preparedness. Whether it's a portable heater, a dependable CO detector, or a stash of high-quality emergency blankets. Preparing for a winter bug-in scenario might seem overwhelming at first, but when you break it down, it's just a matter of addressing insulation, heat generation, safety, supplies, and mental well-being. You don't have to tackle everything overnight. Start by inspecting your home for obvious flaws like drafty windows and doors. Then work your way up to acquiring a reliable alternative heat source and making sure your emergency food and water stocks are robust. Over time, you'll build a system that can carry you through even the most treacherous storms without leaving you and your loved ones in the cold. So stay safe, stay warm, and I'll see you in the next conversation.